welcome back to Jod's Shop.
This video shows us removing the various parts on the front of the truck. We did it in 5 steps. First, we removed the hood. Then we removed the bumper. Thirdly, we removed the bolts on the grille and the grille bar. Then we removed the doors. And finally, we removed both fenders and grille as a unit. Before showing how we did it, we do have a tool recommendation. This is not a tool sponsorship. We just thought what we used worked well and wanted to let you all know. As you remove bolts in an old vehicle, you probably will find that some of the bolts or the nuts have been rounded off during the vehicle's lifetime. Obviously, those bolts or nuts can be very challenging. We found an extractor socket set on Amazon that helped grab onto these rounded parts. The set is from Segomo Tools. We'll leave a link below. Now back to our show. Step 1 will be to remove the hood. There are 2 bolts on each side that need to be taken out. After soaking them for a few days with PB Blaster, we were able to break them free. Before we took the final bolts out, we laid the hood down into some large wooden blocks. This allowed us to remove the last bolts without killing ourselves. That's always a good thing. Since there were only 2 of us because of the pandemic, we used our handy engine lift to lift the hood off and move it to the truck bed. Here's my boss flexing her muscles while she helped out. Next, we removed the bumper. There are 4 bolts on each side that need to be removed. Most of the time they can be very rusty, so we soak them for a couple of days with PB Blaster to help loosen them. We used a breaker bar to loosen all the bolts. Then they all came off fairly easily. The bumper then could be moved and persuaded to finally come off. One thing we try to do when we take the parts off is to either put them in a clearly labeled bag or put the bolts and nuts right back where they came from. That's what we're doing here. These techniques will help when we get around to actually reassembling the truck in a year, or 2, or even 10. Step 3 is removing the bolts that were holding the grille and the grille bar. First, we remove the light covers. There are 3 screws holding each end. Liberal soakings of PB Blaster really helped. Once you get the covers off, then you remove the light fixture. There are 3 screws on the top and 3 on the bottom that need to be taken out. Disconnect the wiring and the light fixture will come out. We decided to remove the doors next. This made it a lot easier for us to get to the fender bolts that attach to the door jambs. First, remove the small access panels at the top and the bottom of each door. After those access panels are removed, you'll see 3 bolts holding each hinge. We soak them in PB Blaster Once the bolts were all loose, we took them all out but two of them, one in the top and one in the bottom. We then used our trusty engine lift to support the door. After removing the remaining two bolts, the door came right off the truck. High fives all around at that point. We move them aside. We'll store them in another shed after our snow finally melts. The truck looks so much different without any doors. The final step is to remove the grille and fenders as a unit. We thought it would be useful to show you where all the bolts are, all those that need to come off. Behind the headlight fixture, there are 7 bolts that need to be removed. Then there are 5 bolts that attach the grille to the radiator. Seven more bolts behind the driver's side headlight fixture. On the top of each fender, there are 6 bolts that attach the inner fender to the outer fender. You can leave the inner fender and outer fender attached if you want. However, we decided to detach them to make it easier for us to remove that grille and fenders by ourselves, since there are only 2 of us. On each side, there are 2 bolts attaching the bracket to the outer fender. Finally, on each door jamb, there are 3 nuts that attach the actual fender to the door jamb. Here we are starting to remove the bolts behind the passenger side headlight. As usual, we liberally soak them with PB Blaster. Here's a view of the nuts from inside the wheel well. We found it easiest if we had one person up top holding the bolts and one person down below removing the actual nut. They all seem to come out fairly easily. These are the bolts that need to be removed on the radiator support. 3 in the middle, along with 2 on the outside. Now we're removing the nuts and bolts holding the inner fender to the outer fender. Notice that the 2 bolts that hold the bracket to the outer fender do not have removable nuts. Once you remove all these nuts and bolts, the outer fender will now be loose from the inner fender. There are 3 more bolts to remove. These are all on that door jamb. 2 of them are removed from inside the cab and 1 is from below the vehicle. All are 1/2-inch nuts. These are the access points that you'll use to remove the nuts from the inside of the cab. The final bolt to remove is at the bottom of the door jamb underneath the truck. We've read that many times this bolt has been rusted, completely frozen, or is actually missing. Sure enough, our passenger side bolt was completely gone. Once you have all the bolts taken out, you should be able to pull the fender from the door jamb. We supported the front grill end with our handy-dandy engine lift. This allowed us to get the grill and both fenders off as a unit. We set the unit on some furniture rollers and then put it aside. So a quick recap, these are all the bolts that had to come off before we could remove the grill bar, and the fenders as a single unit. The next episodes will be removing the inner fender, the radiator supports, and then start actually working on the engine to see if we can get it running.
That's all, folks, and thanks for watching. There's more videos to come on the truck. Leave a comment if you want, and remember, it's free to subscribe. Bye-bye.